Hello, my name is Jasmine Woodard with NACE, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Accessible Recruiting for All Abilities. We encourage you to actively participate in the chat and please post your questions in the Q&A. It is my pleasure to introduce Matt Burnt, Head of Job Search Academy with Indeed. Take it away, Matt.
Well, good afternoon and good morning, friends, and welcome to Accessible Recruiting for All Abilities. This is a conversation for you, recruiters who recruit entry-level and early careers talent, to help you better understand the variety of challenges job seekers with disabilities experience as they pursue jobs and internships and seek to enter the workforce, along with some of their motivations as they begin their careers. As Jasmine said, my name is Matt Burnt, and I am the head of Indeed's Job Search Academy. I will be facilitating today's conversation. Indeed and the Gregory S. Feriebach Center at Eskenazi Health are the co-sponsors of this NACE Insights and Solutions webinar. Now, my panelists today include Dr. David Parker, Program Manager for Research, Education Outreach, and Communications with the Gregory S. Feriebach Center at Eskenazi Health. Also, Michelle Alford-Williams, the Senior Director of Next Gen Initiatives with Disability In. Donna Bungard, the Director of Accessibility for Indeed. And finally, Kenzie Riley, a recent graduate of Purdue and the Feriebach Center Internship Program for college students with physical disabilities. She's also currently a product strategy specialist in the power and automotive industry. I want to thank you all for being part of today's program. Now, we're going to discuss 3 topics over the next 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open up the conversation to you for your questions. We also have staff working behind the scenes to triage questions as they come in, because there are many we can probably answer for you as they come in. But they're going to bring as many as possible to us, to the panel, that we can answer during the second half of the webinar. Now, I would also like to thank our friends, the American Sign Language interpreters and caption providers from Partners Interpreting, who are helping us today make this webinar as accessible as possible to everyone. Now, our panel today includes subject matter experts on accessibility, advocates for workers with disabilities, and multiple of us with physical and/or cognitive disabilities ourselves. We bring a lot of personal experience, as well as experience working on behalf of workers with disabilities and their pursuit of better work. We're going to discuss 3 primary topics using some data from Indeed's 2024 Workforce Insights report to illustrate the experiences and motivations of workers with disabilities and some of the barriers they encounter in their pursuit of better work in their careers. So let's dig in, and let's start by looking at some data insights into worker motivations. When Indeed polled the US workforce for our 2024 study, 6% of our survey respondents, that's 377 people, identified themselves as having a disability requiring a workplace accommodation. 68% of those workers who self-identified as having a disability said they felt optimistic about their job prospects in 2024, which is about the same as the general population. 27% indicated that they would be actively looking for work in the next 6 months, which was actually 8% higher than workers without disabilities. When asked what they typically looked for when searching for a job, their top 2 priorities for all job seekers, in fact, were higher pay and better benefits. No surprise. Workers with disabilities, though, were more likely to rate benefits as a top motivator, in addition to seeking better company culture and a shorter commute. Finally, more than half of job seekers with disabilities preferred a hybrid work arrangement, compared to just 39% for the general population, and 42% preferred remote work compared to 33% of the general population. Now, that's a lot of data that I've just thrown at you. And Michelle, I'm going to come to you first on this. How would you interpret these differences in worker needs and preferences based upon your own experiences? And what have you observed yourself in your work?
So thank you, Matt. So being that I've been working in this community for over 30 plus years, working with students and individuals with disabilities, I do agree that I've seen this throughout our program and working especially right now, mentoring students who are coming out of college and looking for employment, that they are most engaged about culture. They want to know they belong, they want to feel like they belong, and they want to be engaged at a level that they feel like their benefits are also going to be something that they can use to maintain their disability, to maintain their medications, maintain their therapies, and be able to take care of themselves to be able to continue in the workforce. One of the other areas we find a lot of, they do want remote and they do want hybrid because it is easier for you if you're working from home or you're doing a hybrid to schedule doctor appointments, to schedule therapy appointments where you're not having to tell your boss and everybody in your office, by the way, I got to leave to go to therapy. So it does keep you some confidentiality and it keeps you some comfort so that you're able to feel more comfortable in the workforce. And if you'll also notice that they did not want to go in the office. They were like, if it's only in the office, we hear this from our students in our class right now, I don't want to even go into an office if I don't have to. And most of them don't because, again, it's the accommodation. Can they accommodate me? Do I need people to see my disability if I have an apparent disability? If I have a non-apparent disability, do I have to disclose?
You know, it's really, really interesting when we're coaching employers on how to communicate their employer brand on Indeed and on their own sites. What I will often say is when a job seeker is looking at your information online, when they're looking at your brand, they're not looking for you, they're looking for themselves
No.
in you,
Correct.
in people like you, in the stories, in the pictures. It's very important to do that. Kenzie, you have just come into this world. You're early in your career and you've just experienced this well, in 2024 as well. What's your perspective on this? Were you this optimistic? How does this relate to the experience that you had entering the workforce?
Yeah, good question, Matt. I think I have a lot of things that relate to what Michelle said. A hybrid work environment was certainly something that was important to me. I love being in person, but I also do appreciate the ability to go remote on days that that might be needed. And then I also looked at what the company's values are because that is very important to me. You can really tell if a company is going to embrace you or if they will want to kind of hide away a person like me. So I really appreciate that about the companies that I was looking at. And then benefits are certainly very important because you want to feel valued at the same level of everyone else.
How did you do that? What questions did you ask to discern whether or not a company, what you saw on the company page for what they were stating as their mission, vision, and values was something that they were actually living, that you saw yourself there? Were there specific questions you asked?
During the interview, I made sure to always look up the values and have those in my back pocket and know exactly what the company says online. But in interviews, I definitely asked, how do you experience that in your day to day? And I wanted to hear how people truly felt that. And then I also did a deep dive on the internet.
Very good. Always a lot of good information that you can find there and then reality test when you're in the interview. Donna, I want to come to you before we move on to our next topic. I'd love your perspective on this notion of optimism and what you are seeing based on your work at Indeed and just your work personally.
I think there is so much that can be done. We see technologies becoming more mainstream. We're seeing opportunities to do that remote work or that hybrid work because of those technologies, and just because we've kind of had to prove that it's possible through the COVID pandemic. So we're seeing companies really understand that these things embrace people. A lot of people with disabilities, whether it be because of may take longer to physically commute in, or maybe in the nature of their disability, would make that office environment distracting or overwhelming or anything, or any of those numbers of things. So seeing that employers trust people to be autonomous and successful on their own is part of that culture building and that brand building experience as well. So it's this kind of whole package of little things that are starting to come together that empower people to have that autonomy and to have those successful careers in ways that work with them. And companies are seeing that value too.
You know, we did a study a couple of years back of Generation Z and their approach to work. And Kenzie, I have to tell you, you are a very mature generation in this. We asked this notion of flexible work and how important it was. And I don't have the percentages in front of me, but there was a significant percentage that wanted flexibility in their work, not purely remote, not purely on-site, but flexibility. And the second question we asked was, would you accept less salary if you were able to get that and other things? So there's a recognition there are trade-offs that we have to make sometime as Gen Z sort of helps us redefine work. I think that they're looking at work, Kenzie, you and your generation are looking at work very differently and where it fits into your life as opposed to where your life is supposed to fit into the world of work. And I just find that fascinating and really, really encouraging. I think we ought to jump on to our next topic, which is recruitment experiences. So I'd like to turn our conversation now to the experiences that job seekers with disabilities, easy for me to say, job seekers with disabilities reported when they were looking for work and navigating the whole recruitment process. Again, in our Workforce Insights report, we asked job seekers to report about their recruitment experience. Most survey respondents reported receiving some level of outreach from recruiters about job opportunities. It's very heartening. Interestingly here, job seekers with disabilities were 10% more likely to report that they received recruiter outreach. And 49% reported that they actually spoke to the recruiter, compared to only 36% of job seekers who did not report a disability. That surprised me a little bit. I find that a little encouraging. Now, what made a job seeker more likely to respond to a recruiter's outreach? The top factor, surprise, surprise, was compensation. Then familiarity with the hiring organization, feeling that the recruiter took time to look at their background, and industry alignment. These were other top factors. Work from home options, of course, were also a top factor across the board. Job seekers with disabilities were significantly more likely to respond favorably to work from home options. In fact, 44% said that they would respond if a recruiter mentioned work from home in their outreach. So recruiters on the call, if that's an option, bring it up because it can be very important. Now, finally, we asked about ghosting. It's the hot topic all the time. Ghosting in the recruitment process. Job seekers with disabilities reported that there were 12% more likely to report being ghosted by a recruiter after an interview, but they were also likely, slightly more likely to report ghosting a recruiter after an interview, 20% versus 12% for the general population. Now, again, I've thrown a lot of data points at you, and don't worry, NACE is going to provide a PDF with all of these data points available from their website at the conclusion of the webinar so that you can have them and not have to grab screenshots of them along the way. Okay, so these are a lot of data points, and they illustrate some general trends and some differences between workers experiencing the recruitment process. David, I'm going to come to you first here. In your experiences, what would you say are some best practices for attracting talent with disabilities?
Thanks, Matt. And again, it's a real pleasure to co-host. As from the Ferry Buck Center's point of view, we really appreciate NACE's interest in the space in which to discuss all these issues. As you've heard already, the Ferry Buck Center primarily works with college students with physical disabilities, often apparent disabilities. And that's come up already in terms of talking about the opportunity for remote work. A lot of the students and college students that we work with and young adults who have graduated, when they're applying for jobs, when they're interacting with recruiters, a big question for them is the notion of disclosure. At what stage should they share information about their disability? And it's a trade-off. On the one hand, if they disclose it in a cover letter, and Mackenzie, I don't know if this speaks to your experience directly or not, but that may be the reason that they get ghosted. On the other hand, they want to be themselves. They want to be upfront. They want to feel like they're entering into an honest relationship with a potential employer from the outset. So a best practice for employers who are recruiting, who value a diverse workforce that includes qualified individuals or candidates with disabilities, would be to, again, communicate their openness and their interest in recruiting attractive candidates with or without disabilities. Some of that can be said directly in text. Some of that can be going back to the issue of belongingness that we talked about, representation, one on your website through pictures, through images, but also through statements, allow you to communicate to potential applicants with disabilities. They're welcome. They will be understood. You value their contributions. So that would be one of the biggest examples that I would offer to recruiters and employers, is to just make sure proactively that you're creating a safe space so that the applicant with a disability has a better sense, first of all, that they might want to apply to your organization. And secondly, if they choose to do that and share information early about their disability, that they have a sense that that's not going to count against them.
David, wonderful information. Michelle, this is central to your world. This is central to the work that you do. What advice are you giving to employers? I mean, you're looking at it from both sides, but we're talking here, what are best practices employers can employ?
So one of the things we talk to a lot of our corporate partners about, because at Disability Inn, we work with about 500 corporate partners who are currently mentoring our students with disabilities. And one of the things that we find is that for recruiters, making sure that you are not afraid to ask the question. Be open. Make sure that your program is accessible, of course, make sure they can apply and everything. But we find if we train the recruiters to ask a question, like, how do I use an ASL interpreter? What if I can do text versus this? It helps bring down one of the biggest barriers, which is afraid to ask, afraid to make a mistake, afraid to say the wrong thing. And as a person with a non-apparent disability, again, people don't realize it until I start talking, and you can see the ADHD just kind of flowing out of me as I talk. But that's okay. And I still can do my job. And that's one of the things our students want. They want somebody to listen to them, take the time, and understand that they might process information differently. And they are learning to ask for their accommodations and learning how to tell you how they need to be interacted with. But they have the skills. They just might not be able to traditionally sit there in front of you and tell you all their skills and interact and everything. So we do a lot of times, we talk to the recruiters about, can you do behavioral interviewing and a situational interview? Can you do different ways? Think outside the box. And we find that a lot of the recruiters that we work with here at Disability Inn love to go to disability awareness and etiquette trainings, because it just helps them to feel more comfortable. Because if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to talk to the student. They're not going to talk to the applicant, or they're going to ghost because they don't know and they don't want to make a mistake.
As a very proud Disability Inn mentor myself, I can attest to the quality of the etiquette training, additional professional development. I attended this is my first year as a mentor, and I attended the very first training. And my comments afterwards was that it was some of the very, very best training of its kind I've ever experienced in my life. And it's so important. And when you've gone through it, it's like, yeah, this kind of makes sense. But until you've gone through it, it really, really doesn't. So a huge shout out to the Disability Inn mentor program along that way. But I need to get to Kenzie, because Kenzie's been through this entire process. Kenzie, can you give us a little insight into your whole recruitment process, what it was like, and based upon that, what you think recruiters might have been able to do a little bit better, or what best practices you recommend.
Good question. So when looking for a job, I started with several different companies and I did a little bit of a mix. For some, I was very upfront with my disability, and then others I didn't disclose it until later in the interview process. And you would be surprised to hear that many companies during the interview looked at me like a deer in headlights, not sure what they could or couldn't ask. I know that there's a lot of questions that may be illegal to ask. And so they were like, okay, well, thank you. And then the interview was over. And so that was really disappointing. And then when I encountered companies who right away were like, oh, I've had training on this. And then they ask me a list of questions. And then they ask me if there's anything that I would need for the next interview to make it more accessible. And so I really noticed that that training came in for companies who made me feel accepted, more comfortable up front. Whereas the ones who maybe they didn't have any bias towards me, but they didn't know how to proceed.
Michelle, does Disability In have a list of those questions that that was so nice to see Kenzie say, oh, these people have had training. They had their list of questions to ask that put them at ease and put her at ease as well. Does Disability In have a series of questions that we might be able to share with our participants?
Sure, we can share some stuff that we provide to all of our corporate partners or anybody out there about disability awareness and etiquette. One of the biggest resources I want to bring up is askjan.org. ASXJAN.org. They were just doing a presentation this week also from mentors. They have fabulous resources for employers, for people with disabilities, for students, and it's all online and it's all confidential. You can, as a recruiter, McKinsey could have gone and said, hey, recruiter, by the way, this is what the type of the questions you can ask me, or be prepared to know, okay, this is what they're going to ask you. Here's how you can bring that up in your conversation about yourself. So there's really good resources out there, but please feel free to reach out to my team or myself, and we can help as well with connecting you to resources that you might be able to use.
Yeah, it's wonderful stuff. And it can be in the interview, but it can also be once you're on the job as
Yes.
well.
Right.
And when in speaking engagements, I'll look to my own specific experience. Mine is a minor mobility, but for me, that means I don't go up or down stairs without a railing, because I'll go down those stairs a lot more quickly than I want to if I don't have a railing. So it's simply incorporating that into the conversation when I find it's the right time to do that. So sometimes we can help by bringing it up when it's the right time in a conversation. And this is by no means to say that it's easy. We develop the skill as we move along. But it's wonderful to have these resources. Shannon, thank you for sharing that in the chat for us. Donna, before we move on to the next topic, I know you're sitting back there. Is there anything else that you wanted to share from sort of a best practices standpoint that you've seen?
I think it's really the perspective of disability presents differences of experience, but it's not a bad thing. It's just a different human experience. And, when we work cross-culturally, even, just cross dynamics, in any case where we're needing to be open to learning and be curious. And I recommend recruiters keep being curious and kind of shed the idea that this is something bad or taboo. It's just life. I'm what they call them. I call myself mysteriously neurodivergent because back in the 80s, they didn't know what to do with a female who didn't think like everybody else. Yeah, Michelle, you and I have had this conversation. I'm somewhere over there. We'll figure it out someday. But my point is, with that experience, it's not something, we need to, account for. It's just, okay, if you're gonna write me a note of, can you hop on a 5-minute call? Good, bad. It doesn't even have to be a full explanation. Just good, bad. And it'll help my brain when it's going 50 miles an hour, at least pick a direction. So those are just some of those tips of be curious and challenge your own assumptions about disability as a whole.
You know, it's such a diverse topic, and our last topic before we move into this is a very diverse part of it as well, and that's barriers that people have. And that's going to be our final topic before we move into open Q&A. And so for the folks who have joined us here today, if you have specific questions you'd like to bring to the panel, I'd encourage you to start asking them now. You can drop them directly into the chat. I'm not sure if we have the Q&A tool turned on, but either way, there's multiple ways you can ask questions, and then those questions will be brought to the panel. Let's dig into topic number 3, barriers. 43% of the job seekers with disabilities we surveyed indicated that their disability had acted as a barrier to them attaining the kind of jobs that they wanted. However, that's not the only barrier that they reported facing. These respondents were more likely to have experienced additional barriers. So first, we'll look at identity and situational barriers. Job seekers who reported a disability were also more likely to report being earlier in their careers. Now, there's a certain bias towards this that we're more open. The younger generation is more open to discussing this. So, you know, that may be a reason there. They also identified more as LGBTQIA+, to not having access to reliable transportation, to being parents without support networks, and or to having served in the military. Each of these barriers can present unique and different challenges when you're applying for and trying to achieve in work. In addition, we asked the U.S. workforce to identify barriers that are particular to the job search. And frankly, folks identified a lot of barriers, and there are some striking differences between the workers with disabilities and the general workforce. Both groups rated anxiety or nervousness with the process as the #1 barrier, but workers with disabilities rated it 16 points higher than the general workforce. So it bothers everyone. We all need to be aware of that. Lack of experience was the #2 barrier for both, but again, 14 points higher for workers with disabilities. Difficult and lengthy application processes were identified as a barrier for 31% of job seekers with disabilities, and interviewing difficulties a barrier for 25%. Clearly, some of these barriers are obstacles that employers can address directly in their recruitment practices. Donna, I'm going to come to you first on this one, and I actually have 2 questions that I'm going to want us to jump into. First, is this list of barriers consistent with what you have seen or experienced? Are there things missing? Have you seen something different? And then what advice do you have for recruiters on how they can remove these barriers that might exist in their own recruiting processes to more effectively tap into the talent pool of job seekers with disabilities? And just as a heads up, I'm starting with Donna, but I'm coming to everyone on this round of questions. Donna, what are your thoughts?
Well, those are really great questions and really important topics, because it kind of brings us back to what I was saying about disability is just another aspect of the human experience. When I talk about myself in these terms, I am, mysteriously neurodivergent, but I'm also a woman. I am also well over 40. I am also somebody who grew up rural. I'm somebody who grew up in a lower class, like a social economic class. I am someone who, I have a whole bunch of different social identities that make me me. And in some ways, they've empowered me, but in other ways, they have been barriers. Early in my career, being a woman in tech was a much more challenging experience. When you add the fact that I didn't think in the same lines that everybody else did, it compounded it. When we think about that, it's called intersectionality, but those intersections of our social identities, it makes sense. Other things that weren't on there were gender, race, age, things of that nature. And those all impact our experiences. So when I'm talking to or thinking about the recruiter experience with this, when someone says they, they maybe had an educational barrier, it might be a combined thing Because say if you have a woman in her late 40s who's mysteriously neurodivergent, it means she wasn't identified as a kid, which means she may or may not had educational barriers, which means she may or may not had different things. So if she's shifting careers and therefore early in a new career, there might be barriers. But the same thing happens today for youth, especially when you combine gender, race, and socioeconomic class into it. So the education barrier and the education gap is there, which leads to that. But the skills are present. So looking at skills first hiring as that great equalizer and understanding that a person's profile for if they're a fit or not is grounded in and frankly vital to their success in that skills and not some of those extraneous details to use that as a tool to break down those barriers. It is probably the number one. And then the second is don't necessarily focus on the process. Focus on what needs to get done. Somebody has to be a strong communicator. We have the technology. I could be typing this and using it text to voice. And I don't have to be a verbal participant in order to be a speaker here today. We have technology, so don't get caught up in how it's always been done. Think creatively, and frankly, ask the person, how have you taken care of this in the past? Because even if they're brand new to their career and they've never held a job before, they've had to exist in society. So chances are they have opportunities to teach you on how to get things done.
Donna, wonderful. Thank you. David, you've got some thoughts on this as well. And again, tell me what you think about this data and what advice or best practices you have to offer.
Just, you bet, Matt. Building on what Michelle and Donna both talked about, you know, they both give us tools for reframing the experience of diversity, disability as an asset, as a plus, right? So employers, first of all, recruiters, to the extent that you can influence your workplace culture before you even go about recruiting, to promote or at least understand how identity groups within your organization, for example, can support and really embrace the value that people with disabilities bring to a diverse workforce. Know about those, be ready to talk about them, ensure that that information, if available, is promoted on your website so that when the Kinseys are out there visiting your website and thinking about applying, again, can easily see that your workplace is already understanding that diversity in many forms of identity, as Donna talked about, are acknowledged, are valued, are present, are openly addressed in your workplace. Do that work maybe before you go out to do some recruiting in the first place, to the extent that you can. As Michelle talked about, do the work that's available that you're doing, Matt, with your training through disability. And if you need to get past the fear of, you know, asking the wrong question and getting stuck with legal concerns, so that you're more comfortable in just talking about the person's disability as it emerges, so that again, it's not a fearful conversation or a concerning conversation, but it's an opening, curious, inviting conversation that allows that person to talk about, as Donna was just saying, whether it's how they've learned to accommodate themselves in the workplace already, or if they haven't had that experience, what they have learned in their life, not only to address their disability issue, to get past those barriers, but how to use their disability in positive and creative ways. So generally, that would be a suggestion. More specifically, looking at how the job itself is written up, the job description. A lot of times we get questions from interns at the Ferry Buck Center about an essential function that's listed in the job, like the need to drive or the ability to be able to lift and carry a certain amount of weight. And the individual is very qualified to do everything else about the job but that. And if they see that listed as an essential component or function of the job in the description, that may bring them to full stop, may discourage them from even applying. So to just keep thinking about how those essential functions are written up and described and discussed, say during an interview or a recruiting conversation, be clear about whether it is completely essential and non-negotiable, or maybe add some language that suggests there is some wiggle room, or some of these essential functions are really more essential than others. And again, proactively invites the awareness that some flexibility around that, depending on the individual's needs, is certainly something that can be discussed and addressed with. The third suggestion is for recruiters who are coming to college campuses. And again, that's where a lot of the work that the Ferry Buck Center engages in. But what we have found over the last few years, we host a community of practice model where we work with the Disability Services Office and the Career Services Office on campuses, and we help them do more disability-informed career development, essentially, by partnering together. And 9 times out of 10, what they want help with and what they do amazing work around is to work behind the scenes with recruiters and employers so that the career fairs on campuses are more accessible. And that can take a lot of forms. Sometimes employers are willing to come in the day before and meet with a smaller number of students, maybe those with physical disabilities, sensory disabilities, attentional disabilities, who can come into that large venue space and not be so overwhelmed or shut down or distracted as they will be tomorrow when hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are squeezing into the venue space. That's just one example. But the encouragement there is to invite a recruiter who is inclusive of people with disabilities in their recruitment efforts if they're going to a campus to think about using their connection in the career office that they're probably already in touch with. Hey, can we talk to the people in your disability services office too? Is there any way, as we come to campus next week, to ensure that our time with all of you, including students who might be wanting to meet with us who have a disability, can have more accessible experiences while we're on campus? And the Disability Services Office will have lots of suggestions about that, particularly if they're invited to be part of that planning process. So those would be a few suggestions that we would offer from our experiences.
We focus a lot at Indeed right now on skills and helping individuals articulate their skills and their profile in the spirit and in the actions of skills first hiring initiatives. Think of it, recruiter, wouldn't it be unfortunate if you lost out on a candidate who had the precise skill set that you needed because they were discouraged by the wording of your job description, or you were just uncomfortable because you didn't know how to ask questions about what accommodations they might need?
Yeah.
2 simple things that you can immediately change through education and perhaps through process that opens up your talent pool to so much more skill than you otherwise would not maybe have had. Michelle, I want you to chime in on this as well about these lists of barriers and the advice that you have for recruiters.
So one of the things that in my experience, one of the bigger barriers is that work experience piece. A lot of individuals with disabilities, in order for us to function in school, we have to put all of our energy there. And being able to do a full-time job or a half-time job or even getting an internship, because we do a lot of work with our students and getting them internships. And it's the number one barrier. They're like, I try, but because it takes so much energy for me to do in my class, or I need accommodations such as ASL, or I need CART and things like that, that work experience might not be there. So like David said, that look at that duty statement. Do you really need 3 years of work experience for an entry-level position? Because it's entry level. And that should not be 3 years. I mean, I didn't start my job at 3 years of work experience because I didn't have it until I started the job. So it's kind of an oxymoron word. One of the other things you have to understand is now the youth are coming out with a different, so one of the things about language. I had this conversation with one of our corporate partners yesterday. They're like, oh, people first language, I'm supposed to call them a person with a disability. Our Gen Z, thank you, McKinsey, they're coming out saying, no, I'm autistic. I'm an autistic woman. I am a person with a disability. You notice I have my disability pride shirt on today. And that's one of the things that you also have to think about, recruiters. We're not going to hide our disability if we don't want to, but we will if we have to. But one of the things I would suggest you do, go to social media. You can check ours at Disability N, but go find social media content in LinkedIn, in Indeed, are from people with disabilities who are looking for jobs. Watch what they say, how they say it impacts their ability. Understand the community, because we are a huge community and everybody has an opportunity at some point to join us. At some point, you're going to have a disability, regardless of who you are at some point. That's just life, a life experience. And we gather more ones. I know John and David could say, we gather more of them as we age as well, which is, I'm just like, okay, I get another ABC somewhere added into my disability. But I
Yeah,
think
yeah, Michelle, that was me. I mean, I developed mine midway through my life, and I genuinely then, for the first time, appreciated the importance of ramps and railways and all of that stuff in everywhere that I go. So you just never know. Gosh, this is fun. Kenzie, I'm going to round out this conversation with you. We've been here and there, but we're talking about barriers that we've experienced and advice that we have. Is that list consistent with what you have seen? Are there things that you've experienced or seen that were not there? And what advice do you have for recruiters who are looking for the next round of Kenzies to come along?
Thank you, Matt. Good question there. I have so many thoughts on this topic. But one that really comes to mind is when I was looking for a job, my resume didn't quite match up to those of my peers. I spent probably an additional year and a half in school than others, and that was apparent. And for a company that will quickly look for the best as fast as they can, they'll look at my resume and say, oh, okay, it took her longer, she might be a little older. Let's go ahead and get someone who is younger and has done it all really fast. And I just encourage those to keep an open mind that just because it may take someone a little bit more time, or maybe you never know what was going on in someone's life, but the resume may not tell the full story, and give them a chance to show who they are outside of that piece of paper, which is especially hard when you have a limited working experience. For me, it was only internships through the Farabach Center, which is an amazing program that really provides opportunities, which is so important because they gave me a chance to walk in even more doors. And so I would say just keeping an open mind about resumes and things like that would be good.
Wonderful, wonderful. So friends, this is our time where we wanted to come to questions. And this can be a topic that it's hard to ask questions about because you don't, is my question going to be indelicate? If you have, and I say that because right now I don't see any questions in our queue. We would love to involve you in our conversation if you would like to join us in that conversation. And if you don't, we just hope that this has been really, really beneficial for you. So I'm going to give a moment or two for those questions to come in. But as I do, what I want to do is just come back to each of you once and just say, what is that one last bit of advice, that one gem that you want to share, that you want folks to know when it comes to this topic of accessible recruiting for all abilities? Donna, can I come to you first?
Absolutely. Here in the US, 28.7% of adults identify with a disability. Article specifically asked Gen Z, and it was 53% identified as neurodivergent alone, not including any other disability. This means that as recruiters, you've already, even if you don't know about it, you've already been working with people with disabilities all along. You've already done this. That's fine. First of all, that should take a lot of the pressure off of this being something new or different, because you've been there, you've proven it, you've gotten these people in the door. You've done a great job already. You just probably didn't know, at least you didn't know all of it. So what a really great practice would be is to just make sure you're asking everyone their access needs. One of the biggest thing I've ever heard from the community at large is that they can't physically apply. Or when they do, they can't get the phone screening. Maybe they're hard of hearing, maybe they're nonverbal, any number of these things. So just ask everyone what their access needs are and continue helping people with disabilities get jobs, because again, You're already doing it. You just maybe weren't disclosed to, and that's okay because, well, that's a personal choice on their part, on the candidate's part.
What a great simple addition to every application or screening process. A simple question: what are your accessibility needs? Simple yes or no. And if you get a yes, then there's the opportunity to share what that is. Wonderful suggestion. Michelle, can I come to you next?
So Donna took a little bit of mine. My favorite thing is just ask. Just ask the individual, because again, somebody who's blind or visually impaired is different than the other next person who's blind and visually impaired. Donna and I might have similar diagnoses, but we might have totally different ways of handling our disability. So you need to ask us how it fits for us as a person. One of the biggest things I tell recruiters too, are you connected to your ERG, your employee resource group or your business resource group? Because usually almost all companies have one specifically for people with disabilities. You need to know what they're doing and what information they're putting out there. How are they helping, how they can help you make sure that you're recruiting in the same right and using the right language and that you're available. And I also want to make sure that you also talk to them about in the recruiting process. Again, like Donna said, we're already here. We're already in your workforce. You've already hired us. Talk to us about how we know other people who might come in, or ways you can do it differently that might have made it easier for us to get into the workforce or engage with you in the workforce. Again, look at ways to just ask the question, how can I help you get this into the system?
Wonderful. Now, David, I'm going to come to you next because as you've seen throughout this, I always like to let Kenzie have the last word. So, David, what are some of your final thoughts?
I'll be waiting with bated breath to hear, Kenzie, what you want to say.
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure. We come at this obviously as individuals, as organizations, with lots of different perspectives. Sometimes it's a social justice perspective. Sometimes, frankly, back in the day, it could even be sort of a pity or a help perspective. Let's hire those people with disabilities to do the right thing. One of the things that we really emphasize at the Ferry Box Center is let's come at this from an economic perspective. Our mission is to really promote the economic outcome, the well-being, the integration into employment, but also into the community of remarkable people who happen to have a disability, who want to be working, who want to be paying taxes, who want to be active out in their community, leaders in their organization, leaders in their community, be giving back. So I also would just say as sort of a takeaway to recruiters, do whatever work that you can and want to do to come into the recruitment process, knowing that there is a real economic opportunity for your organization, but also for your community to hire qualified, remarkable talent who happen to have disabilities for lots of reasons, including the fact that their unique lived experiences and perspectives with their disability will contribute to your organization's ability to meet the bottom line, to understand the diverse needs of your client base or customers. I've heard Kenzie talk in other presentations she's done through the Ferry Box Center, and we've heard other interns talk about the fact that their disability really came to be viewed during their internship experience by the employer truly as a real asset. They were unique problem solvers in their team. They were bringing aha moments to their much more experienced colleagues and supervisors based on what they had learned and experienced themselves. That then became very meaningful to the rest of the group with lots of other clients and customers. I'll add along those lines, ending on this note. And again, I want to promote internships as a starting point, as that path, that pipeline for recruiters to begin to look at potential talent pool in younger people and college age people today who happen to have disabilities. If your organization is not currently hosting interns, we invite you to really think about being more proactive in either providing that opportunity or expanding it. But then again, to use the internship experience as the first opportunity for your organization to actively recruit interns who are qualified, who themselves have disability. That's when you really begin to see the power of that unique mindset. And that's where you begin to see who you might end up hiring later once they finish their degree work, having the disability, having used that experience you provided through the internship for them and you to go, this is a really good fit. This is going to work. These accommodations are minimal, not expensive, easy to pull off. And that individual in that space of accessibility who felt welcomed and celebrated because of the difference they brought to the workspace gave us some insights and tools and maybe better economic points of view that we can capitalize on now because of their disabilities. So, again, there's nothing wrong with making this an economic conversation. And we really invite you to look at the positive nature of the economic equation your organization needs to keep an eye on for its bottom line, in which disability adds to that bottom line in very positive ways.
Wonderful. And a question has come in, but we'll come to it after we let Kenzie have the last word, or the almost last word.
Thank you for the almost last word. So this is a good question. Some advice that I would give is to maintain confidence with those who do disclose if you do hire them. Because for me at first, it was just between me and my manager, my disability, and I didn't want it to be spread throughout the company that because there's many views, different generations, people think different things. And so now if I share that with someone, I choose to share it. And I can't believe how many other people that I wouldn't have known disclose their disability to me as well in the workplace. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But just maintaining that confidence up front so that it can be that employee's decision of when or how to share. And sometimes you can't make that choice. Your accommodations are obvious, which is okay too. But I've known situations where with obvious accommodations, people don't ask questions and they just kind of stay far away and observe. And I think being curious is so important because that's how you know that you're being inclusive.
Wonderful. Now, the question that came in is a very good tactical question about the advice we gave about asking about access needs. So here's the question. It's, we're asking that question about access needs. As a best practice, do we recommend that this is done at the phone screen level or even earlier in the process, perhaps in the job description or the application? What's the right time to introduce that question? Michelle, I saw you nodding your head, so I want to go first.
From the beginning, every single step, every single time, constantly. My answer. It's because we will not answer it unless we feel comfortable. In the job interview, if we can't apply because we need an access issue and we go to your website and it's not accessible and we can't apply and there's no number to call or it's a number and I'm nonverbal, how do I call that number? So think about access from us even being able to find the job and understand the job. And then I always tell everybody, every single point where you might be touching that candidate, you should be asking them again. You know, we're going to be doing a phone interview. Do you have an access issue for a phone interview? Can we do it via Skype, different format? What is a way that works best for you? And ask everybody, not just somebody you think might have a disability, every single applicant, make it part of your conversation. It starts becoming something you just say to everybody. And you'll be surprised, like Mackenzie said, you'll be surprised when people go, yeah, actually, I do need an accommodation. But they don't want to call it that because they're afraid you're going to say no. You're going to screen them out. They say, I need a reasonable accommodation. By calling it an access to the process, it sort of changes the language a little bit, makes them feel better.
It normalizes the question.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to the end of that, that it doesn't end up only helping people with disabilities.
Helps everybody.
I mean, Matt's been on calls with me when I've said, I live in a rural place in the north. We're getting an ice storm right now. If I drop, I will follow up via, Slack in about 2 hours. That's how long it would typically take, yada, yada, yada. You're going to find people start coming to you as humans
Mhm.
with the full range of how they are to work with. What are your access needs? We don't call them accessibility needs. We don't call them accommodations. Just what are your access needs? Because every human being on the planet at one point or another, disability or no, is
Mhm.
going to have an access need.
It's a message we send to our entire team of people when we're
Mhm.
asking that question that says, your ability to access us, your job, your peers is important. And when you're saying that to everyone, you're making it a company priority. Whomever that was, thank you for asking that question. That's a great question to land on and finish up our conversation for today, because that's our time. I really would like to thank you all, David, Michelle, Donna, Kenzie, for joining us here today. Poor Kenzie always knew I was going to come to her last. And I'd like to thank again our friends at Partners Interpreting for their services and expertise. And of course, we want to thank NACE for being an advocate for our emerging workforce. I'd like to thank you for making the recruitment of talented and motivated students with disabilities a priority for your organization. Now, you can learn more about the internship programs for students with physical disabilities through the Gregory Feriebach Center at Eskenazi Health. By the way, they're the winner of the 2024 NACE Chevron Award for Innovation in Student Programming. That's how I met Larry Markle originally and how we ended up here today. And I've got to do some fun stuff with David. So if you want to check out the internship program, please go to the link that is being dropped. If it hasn't been dropped already on the screen, I think Larry's going to do that for us. So you can learn more about the Feriebach Center by going to that link. If you want to learn more generally about Indeed's efforts to help 30 million job seekers facing barriers get jobs by 2030, it's a centerpiece of our social impact goals. Please go to the link that is also being shared. I'm not sure who's sharing it. Might be Bridget. I'm not sure. But we're sharing that link. And I do know that there have been links already shared to Disability In throughout the course of this program. So you have all that information. Thank you so much for joining us today, for making this a priority. We're doing this again in 2 weeks for College Career Services folks. And we're spreading the news, and we're trying to help everyone pursue better work. Have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye now.